All right, this is an Acura, and as you can see, this engine bay is a little bit tighter, or quite a bit tighter than that truck. In addition, they put these big shrouds over the top so that you don't have a lot of debris stuck in there along the way. But that's simply to keep it clean. It's nothing that it's going to make it run any better or more significant, more effective, more efficient. This is a Traverse type of engine and transmission. What that means is that it's a front wheel drive. Within that truck, it went right down the center and is parallel to the direction that you're driving, whereas this one is perpendicular to the direction that you're driving. Now the way this does it is that the power comes out that end, and then the transmission fits right in back. The transmission is over here on the other side. It probably can see that transmission down right in here. That's the transmission way down there. And so each one of those sides of the transmission has a half shaft going to each side, each of these front wheels, and that's what's driving the car. Let me just go over some of the components once again. That's a battery, and it's very obvious and very open, and that's important. Again, if you look at this, the alternator is right up on top. That's one of those components that you want to make certain is running really well. Now the rest of the components on this, because it's a Traverse engine, you can see everything is located on this side. You can see that this is the serpentine belt right there, and that runs all the components, whereas this belt is running that which is the water pump. So there's a distinction there that they have. Now I gotta tell you that in each case, especially with smaller cars, they talk about interference engines and non-interference engines. And if you have an interference engine and your timing belt breaks, you have to stop that car right there, because all of a sudden what they're talking about is that the piston, when it comes up and those valves aren't opening in the right way, when they're stuck like that, and that piston will come up and slam into bend those valves, or even put a hole in your piston. So it's a big time cost. A non-interference engine is one that has actual, you can look at the top of the piston, and they have a little indent for the valves, and so when the timing belt breaks, you don't have to worry. It's just not going to fire up. It's not going to have a completed engine. The cylinder isn't closed to make that compression. That's an important thing to know. Timing belts are really buried way down in. You have to take the whole front engine assembly apart, and there you're talking about trying to pull that, and you can see all the stuff that you'd have to take apart just to get at that timing belt. With engines nowadays, especially the smaller engines, they're all overhead cams. In other words, you'll have double overhead cams. One cam is operating the intake valves, another cam is doing the exhaust valves, and all of those things have to be timed. That's the function of the timing belt. There are those that are single overhead cams, and so they have both lobes for intake and lobes for exhaust in that single. Years back, you had the camshaft going low down the center of the engine, and so they would be coming out. The V8s were then coming up. Push rods were involved in that, but that's not the case in most domestic cars like this. Most domestic cars that we use on a basis, that they're overhead cams, all of them. Now you can see on this one, this is kind of unique that you're able to see the starter on this component right here. Most times you're not be able to, because it's buried along the way, and that's kind of a convenient thing to be able to see. That doesn't make it any easier to get off, but it's at least easier to see. On this, obviously, that's the reservoir for the brake fluid, and you have the master cylinder right underneath there. In all cars, especially front engine cars, you're doing more braking in the front than you do with the back wheels. In fact, it's probably 70% of your braking is done with the front wheels, 30% in the back, or even 80%, 20%. And all of that is decided by the computer in your car along the way. With that in mind, everything is happening in a front wheel drive. Everything is happening. Your steering, your drive, the dominant part of the braking is happening in the front part of your brakes and the front part of your car. And a lot of that has to do with all the engine weight that you have. I don't care whether it's that truck, but all the weight is at the front end of the car. So your braking is in that front and dominantly in the front. If it was 50-50, when you put on brakes, you'd have this back end that it'd want to swing out on you because it's braking equally. Whereas now you're braking 80% or 70% in the front, it'll steer along the way. ABS brakes, every car has got them nowadays. It's anti-lock brake system. And what that means is when you hit some ice, you'll feel that pulsating along the way, and that's braking. And you're not pressing that thing and locking up the brakes. It's automatically just pulsating the brakes so that they don't lock up. If you lock it up on ice, all you're going to do is spin around, and it's not going to brake at all. So everything has got anti-lock brake system, and the ABS brake system is run by the computer in the car. It'll sense that we're sliding, and so all of a sudden it'll be pulsating along the way. This is a front wheel drive car. You also recognize that there are all-wheel drive cars and four-wheel drive cars. Now, four-wheel drive cars means that you're actually engaging all four wheels. In other words, it would normally run on the front, and all of a sudden you're pushing the button to engage the back wheels as well that would drive the car. Now, on the other hand, all-wheel drive says that computer is going to distinguish what we need, whether we need the 2 or the 4, and some even have just a one wheel driving the car along the way. I don't know how they do that, but that's the concept along the way. Cars that have four-wheel drive, obviously they're talking about having something that is running the back wheels, and so you have another drive shaft that's coming off of the transmission that's driving that. When you have a Traverse engine like this, it's almost impossible for you to get all-wheel drive or four-wheel drive. You just don't have any way of putting the power that's running these wheels like this to run those wheels in the same direction along the way. Again, you have the radiator here. You have electrical fans in here that are running thermostatically. Obviously, this is the expansion tank right here along the way. This is because that power steering unit is way down there. They put a hose on it, and that's where you put the power steering fluid in there. And obviously, that's for washing the windows. So pretty much everything that we talked about in the truck is now contained in a much more compact area, and it's often more difficult to work on it as well. It's like a puzzle. Once you start taking things apart, there's only one way that you can get it back in as well. That gives you some kind of idea of where the components are there. We'll be doing a look at brakes, both front and back on cars, just to show you the calipers, the pads, and the rotors along the way, and maybe we can take a look at. I've got some drum brakes on the truck, and maybe we could take a look at the drum brakes on that. All right. So those are the components. I think I've covered every component on this that you'd be interested in looking at. All right. We'll be following again a worksheet that covers all of the components that we had talked about in here. All right. Thank you.